Hey guys, welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews. Today we're taking a look at the completely redesigned Adidas Solar Glide 5. Let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, didn't have a chance to preview this video, and this final synopsis is my own. I would also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. The Adidas Solar Glide 5 has been completely redesigned. We get a brand new silhouette, new midsole, and new upper. I would classify this as a highly cushioned, neutral workhorse daily trainer. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I think you're gonna get a ton of miles out of this shoe. You get a lot of premium materials. It has great build quality, and I think it's really kind of geared towards all-around use. So you can run in the shoe, and I think it's probably more geared towards your average to slower paces, and works really well for just kind of like typical everyday wear as well. This shoe only costs $130, which is pretty impressive considering you get some premium materials, and I think this will last you a lot longer compared to most other daily trainers. So for it to only cost $130, I think is a great deal. And because this is a solid daily trainer with a bunch of different technologies and components built into the shoe itself, it weighs 11.6 ounces, which puts it more towards the heavier end of things. Now compared to last year was I think 11.2 ounces, so we went up 0.4 ounces for the Solar Glide 5. So going up 0.4 ounces gets you a little bit more midsole. We now have a bigger heel area and more boost foam in the forefoot. And we actually get 4 millimeters more of stack height compared to last year. So now we have 36 millimeters in the heel, 26 in the forefoot for that same 10 millimeter drop. So it looks like they decided to add some more midsole, a little bit more cushioning to the Solar Glide, which does increase the weight, but we do get a little bit more in the way of stack height. And when it comes to the midsole, we have a whole lot to talk about here. It's basically a dual density foam setup with the top layer being a basic EVA foam that kind of takes over once you get to the last like 20% of the midsole. Now this isn't Light Strike or Light Strike Pro, this is like a basic EVA foam. And then the second foam is the classic, everyone knows it, Adidas Boost. Now, if you take a look in the forefoot, we do get a little bit more boost than last year, and then we do get a substantial chunk in the heel area. Adidas calls this their double bubble with boost, and it kind of looks like it because you get a bubble towards the forefoot area and a bubble towards the heel section. Now sandwiched between that top layer of EVA foam and Adidas Boost is something called Adidas LEP. If you flip the shoe over, you can actually see it in the middle of the outsole, and it's just basically this plastic plate, and I'll throw a picture on screen so you guys can see the diagram and the breakdown and the separation of the midsole so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Essentially, this is a plastic plate that kind of splits into like 4 different prongs, and you can actually see them here on the outsole. So it's this plastic piece here, and then on the medial side you can see these 2 little blue lines that kind of represent where the plastic plate sticks out. And again, if you flip it over the shoe over, it has the little branding in the middle of the outsole. Now what exactly does this plastic structural element inside the midsole do? Well, it basically again acts like a torsion bar, so it keeps the shoe from twisting too much and kind of stiffens things up to allow for a more stable ride. Now Adidas claims this also kind of stores energy kind of like a plate would inside the shoe. I personally didn't experience that, but it really did keep it relatively stable. And another big reason of why this shoe feels so stable even for being a neutral running shoe is the fact you have a really wide forefoot area and a really wide heel area. Now the fact that it does kind of narrow out through the midfoot is kind of counteracted by the fact that again you have that LEP system or torsion plate system that really does provide the stability, but the really wide kind of crash pad in the forefoot and heel area gives you a really wide platform to land on and really just helps the overall stability. So what do I think of the overall kind of flow and feel to the midsole with all of the various components in here? Well, I thought it was very nice. You do have a slight rocker geometry, especially in kind of the toe area, so the toe off experience I thought was very pleasant, and you really do notice how much ground contact you have just because the forefoot area and heel area are so wide. And again, it's a very stable, neutral shoe. Now when it comes to the cushioning on this shoe, I thought it had a nice level of impact protection. However, you do notice most of the cushioning in the heel just because there is such a substantial chunk of boost foam. It has that classic boost feel to it, really bouncy, well cushioned, and very enjoyable. Again, you don't notice it as much in the forefoot because you get a thinner layer with an EVA foam on top that kind of dampens the overall feel. But again, the heel of the shoe has that classic Adidas Boost feel, and I'm happy they kind of upped it just to kind of increase the overall sensation. I really enjoyed how well cushioned that heel section was. Another thing I'll say is that your foot does sit lower within the midsole, so your foot kind of sinks in, and this top layer of EVA foam on both the lateral side and medial side kind of acts like a foam wall to keep your foot contained, and again, adds just another touch of stability. So to kind of summarize, that plastic LEP system really stiffens up the shoe. You get a really wide crash pad in the heel and a forefoot area, and the Adidas double bubble boost sections, double bubble boost, kind of fun to say, is really more noticeable in the heel of the shoe just because you have such a large chunk, and does feel nice in the forefoot. It's just not as noticeable. And then again, your foot sits a little bit lower into the shoe, allowing for a little bit of sidewall on the lateral and medial side. And again, I would classify this as like a stable neutral shoe just because it has a couple stability elements built into it. Again, it's not classified as a stability shoe, just feels like a stable neutral running shoe. And moving on to the outsole, we do get name brand tire rubber. This outsole rubber comes from Continental tires. So Adidas partnered up with Continental tires for some of their more premium outsoles. I think it's like featured on like their Adidas Boost and some of their top tier racing shoes. So I'm happy we get it here on the Solar Glide 5. Now with regard to the traction, I personally didn't have any issues. Typically this kind of rubber has performed well for me, and this was no exception. I will say that the overall traction pattern is relatively smooth. There's no like massive deep lugs, but again, I didn't have any like serious issues, and I thought it gripped the pavement and road very well. Moving on to the upper, it's a non-elastic knit upper with so-so breathability. It's not the best, not the worst. And this comes actually from half recycled ocean plastic, the Parlay ocean plastic that they recycle, melt down, then kind of string it out into yarn. And then the other half comes from recycled polyester. So the entire upper is made of recycled materials, with half of those recycled materials coming from recycled ocean plastic, which is kind of a cool touch. And when it comes to the overall fit of this shoe, you do get a really wide toe box, and I think it runs just a tad long, so I do recommend going down half a size if you want a more snug or more well-contained fit. For the toe guard, you get like a rubberized piece of plastic tape across the toe with an internal plastic toe guard, and then you get the plastic overlays for the Adidas logo symbols. I think this is more decorative. It doesn't appear to be kind of like any structural element. Moving on to the tongue, we get a really interesting approach with a two-part, I guess, setup here. It's non-gusseted and has a really thin material all the way up until the top section, which then becomes a really kind of wide, thick, tall tongue. And if you move about a quarter of the way up the lacing system, you'll notice it has an extra loop for the laces to interact with. Now, because the tongue is so thin, there's not a lot of cushion between that loop of where the laces kind of wrap around and the top of your foot. So I did notice some irritation there. I do wish maybe they kind of put this like lacing loop on the outside of the upper just so it wouldn't interact on your foot, just because the tongue is so thin. Now, this probably wouldn't have been an issue if they had a little bit more padding, kind of similar to what they had at the top of the tongue, but I did notice that I did have some pain points just because when I try to get a good lockdown with this shoe, I would notice kind of some lace pressure through that extremely thin tongue and onto my foot. And then moving to the top of the tongue where it's really plush and thick, very comfortable, felt very nice in that area. However, the sides of the tongue, because they're non-gusseted and not attached to anything, would sometimes fold under my foot and kind of stick up a little bit more. You can flatten it out, but it was just something that happened every now and then when I was tying up my shoe. Moving to the back of the shoe, I thought the ankle and Achilles area performed well with regard to cushioning. Didn't have any issues, and again, the internal part of that ankle and Achilles section, very well padded, very comfortable. Now, the heel counter on the shoe is probably something you might not have seen before. Essentially, it's a split heel counter, so it's not connected in the middle here. It's essentially a piece of fabric that joins the two support sections of the heel. So basically, it kind of wraps around your heel and leaves the middle part open. There's only a piece of fabric that connects those two heel counter components or structures, if you will. So essentially this allows for less Achilles tension, allows your Achilles to kind of slide back into the heel. And personally, I didn't have any issues with it. I think when I got a good lacing system or lacing setup just right, I didn't have any heel lift, and I thought it was fairly comfortable, especially with all of that padding. So split heel counter, which I thought was really interesting, with only a piece of fabric on the direct back of the heel counter itself. So those are all the basic facts about this shoe. Let's talk about what works well and what doesn't work so well for the Solar Glide 5. The first big positive for me is the durability, and I think you're going to get a lot more miles out of the Solar Glide 5 compared to a conventional daily trainer. Now, a big reason for that is the Adidas Boost foam. Typically, this doesn't bottom out as quickly compared to traditional EVA foam midsoles or other daily trainers, so it is a little bit heavier, but it does last a lot longer, and it provides a nice level of impact protection and bounce. The next positive for me was the stability of this shoe. It is a neutral shoe, but I like the stable platform. Again, a really wide forefoot, really wide heel area, and that that torsion bar kind of does stiffen up the shoe that gives you a nice stable kind of system to run with. So yes, it is a neutral shoe, but it provided me a nice stable experience. And you know, if I'm tired or my legs are completely worked, I like to have something that kind of helps me not get too sloppy with my form. And I think this shoe helped me do that. However, the shoe isn't perfect, and there are a couple things that I think could probably be improved upon. The first negative is that it weighs 11.6 ounces, which is definitely towards the heavier end of the spectrum. So it does have a lot of cushion, a really good setup. It just might be a little bit too heavy for some of those longer runs. So I think it works well for kind of medium to short runs, maybe some of those easy days. It's not the easiest to pick up the pace in just because it does have so much kind of heft to it, but it is very comfortable even though it does come in towards the heavier side of things. And the last negative is I think the tongue can probably be improved. I wish it was a little bit thicker. Again, the bottom half is just a super thin material that kind of rolls underneath itself. You can actually see your foot and sock inside the shoe, which I thought was just kind of strange. And then the lacing system, the way it's set up is they have an extra ribbon cable on the underneath part of the upper. So it interacts directly with your foot because the tongue is so thin. So it doesn't have too much cushion between the lacing system and your foot. So if you try to tie the shoe tight, it just feels kind of uncomfortable directly against your foot because the material of the tongue is so thin. And then once you get to the top of the tongue, super comfortable, very plush, but it just feels kind of awkward and just feels like a disjointed experience because you go from this really thin and minimal tongue to all of a sudden this massive thick piece at the top that does again fold in on itself on the sides, which is kind of strange. So you can kind of flatten it out, it just takes an extra step. So I hope they improve the tongue. I hope they make it gusseted, a little bit thicker, and just a little bit more consistent, and maybe a little bit of lower profile for a more streamlined look and feel. So where does that leave us? Well, I think this is a great, reliable, durable daily training option that even though it does weigh a little bit more, I think will last you a ton of miles, and you get an excellent cushioning system with the classic Adidas Boost. Plus you get a lot more of it compared to last year. So if you're a fan of the Adidas Boost cushioning and how that feels on your foot, I think you'll like the overall experience here, especially with that really wide forefoot and really wide heel area that helps kind of provide a really stable, consistent ride, even though it is a neutral shoe. However, if you're someone who wants a highly cushioned daily trainer that's a little bit lighter, a little bit faster, and just has a little bit less ground contact, I would probably go in a different direction. Well, that concludes my review. Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think Adidas made the right moves with the Solar Glide 5? And is it a shoe you're interested in trying out? Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews. Hope you guys have a great day, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.